I would like to preface this by saying that this is a bit of an individual journey, and I'm also happy that I'm coming after Kirsten, so now I can use a couple of anecdotes from her experience since you've listened to her story now. So I hope I can use that, Kirsten, if you don't mind. So a little bit about me before we start. Hi, my name is Keerthana. I live in Germany now, so if that is too hard to pronounce, you can always say KK, like all my colleagues call me. I am originally from India. I'm a software engineer for the past 5 years, and I like to talk about technology and especially about women in technology and that kind of stuff. Sometimes when you're the only person who looks like you in a room, I guess that's an important thing to do. Well, okay. So let's get into the meat of the matter. Whatever number that you see on the screen right now, I think we've all felt that the number of women as you go up in the leadership roles, not just in STEM, but in any industry across the world, is probably less than men, right? So I could find you the source of this number, but from a personal experience, as person who has worked with three companies, one startup and two MNCs, one in India, two in Germany, I can tell you I have never worked with a female engineering lead or a female senior engineer. I've had other women in my team. I've had designers, I've had product owners, I've had scrum masters. But when it comes to hardcore senior engineering teams and having that kind of leadership to look forward to, I have never met people in my organizations. Of course, I've met women during conferences, but I still feel like it's a very small subset of all the engineers that exist, and that is really discouraging. I think, today compared to maybe 30 years ago, women have more opportunities to go higher up in the food chain, but it's still the number of people are less. And do I honestly believe that all that entire discrepancy happens because of overt discrimination? No. So there are definitely factors you cannot control. There are definitely places and people who think, oh, women are just not good enough. If I hire a female senior engineer, she just 2 years later she's gonna quit and have a baby. Like, I'm sure you've always come across people like that, and I'm sure they exist. But here I'll be talking more about some strategies I found that I can use, and I will not be focusing on the things that just the factors that we cannot control. So let's go through the factors. Now, these are my personal list. I'm sure there are other factors, but I think these are the ones that I'll pay attention to. And skill, self confidence, support, and mentorship. So I'm going to split this into two, and I'll be first talking about the first two. Uh, Sort of they come together in each of the five habits that I mentioned. So the first, when it comes to skill and self-confidence, would be to improve your own code reviews. So for those who are not as familiar, a code review is something as a software engineer, you submit your code and your peers or your manager just reviews it, make sure that the quality is good, you don't have any errors that you're willfully putting into the code base again. And so one thing that I realized that I had to improve was my code reviews. How did I do that? I started tracking what were some specific conditions, what was some specific feedback that was repeating in my code reviews. Is there a particular kind of feedback that I was receiving? You're forgetting this kind of architecture, you miss this. And so when you record that kind of positive or negative feedback that you get, and you make sure that you are not making the same mistake again. It's not about never making mistakes, it's about finding newer and creative mistakes to make, making sure that you learn from your mistakes, right? So improving your code review, improving the quality of the code you create, that I think is not just your skill but also your self confidence. Because at some point you can create code that is beautiful, that's perfect, but 2 months down the line it may not be performant, it may not be what your company or that particular um, objective needs, right? If the same code can handle 500 points in a data set but it cannot handle 500,000 2 months down the line, then I don't think that's good code. So it's not just about your skill, it's about the confidence you have of trying new things and having good quality code as the output for what you create. So that is one thing. The second thing is articulating your arguments. So this comes sort of right parallel to your code review. There are probably points where you create something, and when somebody else is reviewing it, they would say, I know you use this particular way of doing things, right? You use a ternary operator, you use this structure of the language, but I don't think it's the right one. Now, maybe they're not seeing something that you thought of, but articulating it and having the confidence to articulate why you chose a particular way instead of just rolling over and just accepting it just because, oh, a senior engineer thinks that this is how I should do it. I guess I should answer, and I guess I should do what they tell me to do. So having the right words to articulate why you do things, I think that's really important. And that is something your vocabulary learns, as you code more, as you see somebody else's code, as you review somebody else's code, and you understand how different members of your team, how your seniors, how your juniors, how they approach the problem, and what is the right terminology to use, right? You might have a feeling this is why we should do, because 2 months down the line this code won't be performant. But if at the moment of describing your code you don't have the terminology of performance in your mind, you might not have the right word to say, I am doing it this way because I see this problem coming in the future, right? So finding those right words, I think those that is a very important habit that you can build, using the right word when you discuss your code. One thing I've always noticed that the senior engineers, or people who are moving into the senior space, do is having their own solutions that they suggest. So there could always be a way, or there could always be a methodology that your company or your organization uses to solve a particular problem. But when you go the extra mile to look through the problem and to find a novel solution, now you don't have to reinvent the wheel just because, but if you see a point where things can be optimized, if you see something like, oh, there could be a problem happening there which I can solve, that is something I think all senior engineers do. Because at the end of the day, when you transition to becoming a senior engineer, it's about having responsibility for the product, right? So it is the point where you think, it is my responsibility that this product is optimized. It is my responsibility that I not only just code what we decide based on what the story is. I'm going to go off based on an agile point of view here, but I'm sure you can have questions later. So, whatever is defined in the story for me to do, that could be A, B, C. But if while I'm working on this story and I see, I can create a solution that handles not just A, B, C for this story, but also something that happens for the upcoming story, and give my own solution to problems, that is definitely something that you should work on and you should try to create. So I would say these 3 points, or these 3 habits that I've developed, I would group all 3 of them into the skill and self-confidence section. And for me, it comes down to tracking the frequent feedback that you receive and using reasoning for the methodology that you use when you're coding. Another thing that I notice in these 3 habits is that not only your point of view, sometimes you get inspired and sometimes you understand things better when you look at the same code from a different point of view. Sometimes we as engineers stick only through the point of view of people who create things. When we step out of our box and look at it from a product owner's point of view or a user's point of view, how can I improve the user experience for a user who may not understand this product as much as I do as the person who creates it? If there's some changes that I can make to make it more intuitive, understanding those different points of view might help you create better solutions for uh, your project. And at the end of the day, I think that's what becoming senior means, thinking, seeing a more 360-degree holistic point of view to the problem and having solutions that address more things. Now, the second part of it is something I would like to stress more. I know some really, really smart people who have a lot of skill, but creating the kind of support system that helps you build them, especially if you don't start out with them, I think that's a bit more important than having the skill in the first place. Because technical skill, at the end of the day, you can take a course on Udemy to learn them, right? But having a support system of others who understand you, having a support system like the women tech makers, where when you hit a snag in your process or when you hit a snag with your colleagues, having another engineer to like discuss it with, hey, this is the problem that I face, how did you guys tackle this, getting those different points of view. I think that's a really important habit to have. I think you guys have already taken the first step being here, but I would say the next step after that is taking advantage of a mentorship. The mentorship is not something that you are getting from a mentor, but where you become the mentor to somebody else. So when the minute you start moving up the hierarchy, you have to take responsibility for the people who are not just your peers but coming in, who are new to the role, who are junior to you, and showing others the ropes, showing them how it's done, and having the confidence to be a mentor to somebody. I think that's a really major step that all seniors, or as you go higher in your career hierarchy, that is definitely a step that you have to take. So if you can have the advantage of giving somebody help, that is definitely something that you should do to move forward, I say. So summing these two up: taking initiative to solve problems, documentation of the cases that you've been through, some nasty ugly bugs that you've seen in production, or just the way in which things are done, the way in which you have code styles in your code, the way in which you have your release process, writing down some documentation for that, for the next person who's joining your team, maintaining that. uh, I think those are really important steps that you take, uh, not just for just becoming a senior engineer by title, but just to feel confident in yourself, that you understand the hierarchy, you understand the process, and at some point, if somebody gets stuck, if you're the person who's writing the documentation, people know that you are the person to ask. And that's how you know that you become senior. You become the go-to person that people ask about things. Yeah. And uh, and another step that you reach is you become confident enough in your ideas that you start sharing them, not just within your colleagues but within your community, right? So I have an idea of how to improve the performance of queries that you do between the website and the backend servers, right? Once I'm confident enough in my idea, not just my technical skill, but how to present it to others, I think that gives you a sphere of knowledge of how to talk to people, not just within your company, but outside as well. So here is where I would like to give some concrete examples for some of the things that I've been mentioning right now, maybe just to help you understand. Um, the first company that I was ever a part of, right? I joined 3 months into my tenure there. I was very junior at that point. I remember the guy I joined with me. He told me that the previous day he had been up until 11 p.m. in the office solving a production bug. Just because he happened to be there at 6 p.m., he was there, and the senior engineer was fixing stuff, and they were there until 11 p.m., so he stayed as well. Now, India, where I am from, most, or at least the city where I'm from, there is a 6:30 p.m. sort of a curfew, right? All female employees are expected to get out of the office by 6:30, and security checks in and make sure that if you're a woman, you're in the office after 6:30, your manager needs to be known, and there's a whole process to go through. Now, am I saying that you should be late in the office past 6 p.m. to get your promotion? No, definitely not. But is there a gray area where 6 months down the line, this guy who joined with me, he has been on the sidelines watching senior engineers solve a couple of production bugs, while I have not been able to do that because I leave at 6 p.m. on the dot. And now when there comes time for a promotion to senior, you know, uh, would the manager be choosing me or him, right? So these are the gray areas where it's not an overt discrimination, not by any means. I don't think any of them thought of it that way, but you miss out on opportunities because of factors that not even you can control, right? So how can we cope with things like that? So when I was in that sort of place in my career, what I did was I came in a bit early. I tried to see what were the things that happened when I was not there, and I tried to talk to the engineers about them, right? I'm not saying that this will happen every single time and this is the right company for me, because at the end of the day I moved out of that company. I'm now in a company where everybody has laptops, and so if somebody pushes something at 11, I they just call me and we talk about it. Yeah. But as a junior engineer who had a desktop and not a laptop, I just didn't have access to that. So there are always problems that are going to arise, and there is no easy, simple answers to it. At the end of the day, it comes down to you asking for things for your career. You need to ask for help. You need to ask for roles. You need to ask for feedback. You need to ask for perks, right? But what gives you the strength to ask for that? Knowing that you're good enough, right? Maybe not the best, but good enough. Knowing that you deserve it, right? So that's the difference between me right now versus me 4 years ago. So right now, I'm confident enough to make mistakes, which I would not have done maybe 2, 3 years ago, right? I think that's the basis of why we have imposter syndrome, or the basis of why we don't have enough senior engineers as women. At Of course not the only thing, but one of the main things is sometimes we are just too risk averse. And I in my own personal life, some of these habits have helped me decrease sort of those habits of being risk averse, right? When I improve my skills and when I improve my self confidence in myself, I have more confidence to suggest new things. Maybe the first thing I suggest doesn't work out, or maybe the second one doesn't, but you learn from those mistakes. You keep trying, and you learn from, especially when things go wrong, you learn why did it go wrong, and the next time you suggest something, you incorporate the feedback that you get from the last time. So for me, that involves tracking the feedback comments I get in my code reviews, because I have the memory of a goldfish. Sometimes I keep repeating my mistakes, so tracking it makes sense for me. Maybe you're the kind of person who remembers feedback, and you make sure that that doesn't happen again without tracking. So I think one part of your career journey is definitely individual, but these habits that you create, I think at the end of the day, it's about generating within yourself the knowledge that the becoming senior is not just a goalpost. You're not going to hit it tomorrow. It's something that you create within yourself. It's sort of a comfort level that you build within yourself after doing a lot of trial and error, and after sort of becoming the kind of person who is comfortable enough to make mistakes, if that helps. So these are some of the habits that I've built for it. I'm sure in your own journey, you will build a lot more, or more habits that suit you. And I hope this has given you some inspiration or some ideas for the habits that you can build to build go higher in your career. Yeah. So those are the main points that I have, and I hope that comes in niche with the progress, not perfection. So I hope you find habits that help you take initiative. So that's it from my side. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for your talk. This was great advice, great insight, and we can see, I mean, we can hear the progression and how you matured your thoughts throughout your journey. Thank you so much for sharing. Um, I think we had similarly to Kirsten, a lot of interaction in the chat, people sharing ideas with you. I do believe we have a question. Our first question is from Angelique, asking, do you have suggestions to efficiently keep tracking the mistakes and tricks that you use in each project? Do you use any particular tool, for example?
Um, for myself, no, not particularly. I actually just used an Excel sheet as sometimes to track stuff. Um, I Once in a while, I think every few months, I go through some of my old code reviews and I look at something if it's repeating. Yeah. So I do sort of in an agile construct, it's called a retrospective. So I do a kind of retrospective of my own code reviews or the kind of feedback that I get while I go through my code. And I also go through my previous code that I built every few months. Just take time out, go through it and see, like, 3 months down the line, would I still build this the same way? What would I change? Yeah. And we at our company, I'm really fortunate. I Even though I'm the only woman there, I feel like the guys are always really supportive. And we have a sort of a channel in our Slack where we share these good articles that we read with each other. So I go back and I read stuff and I make sure to share stuff with them as well, things that I read that I think that we can use for our product. So I make it a point to have a space of my own. I just use Excel where I track down things. Oh, this has happened. This has happened again, you know. And maybe in terms of code reviews, it's not as concrete, but going back through your old code every few months and seeing if you do things the same way, I think that's definitely a concrete thing that you can do to improve your code quality.
Great. Uh, okay, we have other questions here. Cool. So we have a question from Deepali asking, what's the ladder that you would suggest to follow for an entry level with 1 year experience in AI to follow and achieve the leadership goal?
So, um, not particularly AI specific because I don't work in the field, but in terms of, I assume AI is computing. So, anybody is in a computing or an engineering sort of a field, um, the major thing that I would focus on is to build a support system, right? If you don't see other people in AI who are women who are going forward, forget being women, look at other people, have somebody in your mind who you want to be. Now, that's easy to say, but do I have a person in my mind who I want to be like? Not exactly one person. I follow a bunch of people on Twitter. I see what they post. I like what they do. So if you ask me off the top of my head, there are a few React creators on Twitter who I think, they do some pretty great work. One fine day, I would like to become somebody like that, right? So if you can find a sort of somebody, not maybe one particular person, but a few people who you can see yourself like 5 years down the line, I would like to reach that position, right? And then work backwards. If I were in their position, what are the skills I would need? Of course, from the obvious, I have to post Twitter and write blog posts kind of thing. That is definitely a one part of taking initiative and sharing things with the community. But in terms of their technical skills, what would I do to reach that point of view, and work backwards? And another thing, as much as you have mentors and things that like that, also keep in mind things that you can do to make your life easier, right? Your job easier. Those points really that you can see in the code base to optimize things and to suggest solutions. Those are the biggest things that I've seen, like going through not just your code but the code of your peers and seeing where things can be improved and seeing where you can bring in your new ideas. I think that's the fastest way to grow as a software engineer, any field of software engineering.
Excellent, thank you. And yeah, I do agree that, I mean, you probably have domain specific, idols and maybe people to look up to, but the process is pretty much the same. Um, I saw another question and now I kind of missed it. Oh no, here. Okay, so Andy is asking, how do you learn and improve your skills in general?
um, I wish I knew that too, to give you a really good answer. I wish like I could tell you, oh, this is exactly the resource I follow, and because of that, my skills are now perfect, and I am very confident in all of my skills. I wish I had a silver bullet like that. Honestly, it's through a lot of trial and error. It's through a lot of uh, when I have the motivation, I read. When I have the motivation, I sign up for talks, and that forces me to learn new things, right? So for me, this is why I stress the part about the support system a lot. So when you see other people who are in your uh, not just your peer group, but just right above you, and you see the kind of things that they do, I think that motivates you to learn, and you learn from them far better than taking any technical skill course that you just can take and just understand the ins and outs of a library, right? Because anybody can read documentation, but knowing how to use said documentation depends a lot on use cases, and use cases you learn not just from your experience but from the experience of others like you. So on the micro set, that would be like your colleagues, I guess, or other people in your company. But on the macro, it would be just finding the support system and finding your community, and just understanding the ways in which to keep yourself up to date, right? That would be the main thing that I follow. But like I said, this is my individual journey. Whatever works for you, you need to go through these steps and find out how you can build things in a way that works for you.